Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest session in the Nexion not Microsoft Modern Workplace, Legal Modern Workplace webinar series. We're going to start in around 60 seconds, so just give everybody a minute to join, and then we'll start with the session. And I'm probably going to say this a few times in the next 60 seconds. So. We're just going to start in around at 12:01. We're going to start for those joining. Just give everybody an opportunity to connect in, and then we'll get going. Okay, we're just going to start in a few seconds, guys. Okay, so welcome to the latest session in the webinar series, focusing on the legal modern workplace. So a series of webinar discussions that focuses primarily, up until this point at least, on the tooling that law firms need to get in place to be able to move forward their digital transformation journey, optimize the experience, not just for users, but also for clients as well. So this latest session is actually starting to look a little bit outwards from that tech stack. So the title of this morning's session or this afternoon's session is putting the client at the heart of your technology strategy. So this session, we've got the agenda in front of us there. So we're going to go on a journey to talk about what's important for the client, how to make the client experience be part of that tech strategy, what clients actually expect from a law firm today, and in terms of blockers and challenges, what's getting in the way of law firms implementing a strategy that puts their clients at the heart of their tech journey. We're going to pause to look at service design thinking and how that can be used and why it's important in defining a tech strategy and capturing not just the views of the client, but also the views of the internal stakeholders as well. And then we're going to think about, well, how do we implement this change? How do we change the mindset internally? And when we get onto the introductions of the panelists today, we've got views from both internal inside a law firm and also a view from the vendor side. And we're going to be capturing what the vendor's opinion is how on how law firms can make change more effective when implementing new technology. I will put my teeth in and be able to speak clearer as we get on, I'm sure. Implementing new technology. And then we'll finish off with where law firms can start implementing the strategies that we've discussed. So as said, up until this point, we've mainly focused on internal operations and tooling when it comes to the legal modern workplace. And what you can see on the screen there is the wheel that we created as part of the white paper that we launched back in January that tried to bring together the various tools that we see law firms requiring to be able to implement a digital transformation strategy, and trying to bring together not just the legal tech tools, but also the Microsoft tooling as well. So that there's a joined up thinking when it comes to building out a strategy and implementing change. But as we stated, for this session, we're going to try and look outwards rather than just focus on optimizing internal operations and try and capture what's important to the client and how to implement change. So helping us on this journey, we've got two fantastic guest speakers. We've got Jane McCants, who's a transformation coordinator at Thornton's Law. Thornton's Law are approximately a 600 employee law firm operating across multiple sites within Scotland. So Jane's background is not law, which is brilliant. So we're going to get some new, fresh views on how we can implement this. Her background is design, with a master's in design for business, masters in a design for business, and over 15 years in the creative industries. She joined Thornton specifically to apply design thinking and human-centered innovation to the way the firm operates and serves its clients. Jane also tutors on the Legal Technology and Innovation module at the University of Glasgow School of Law. So welcome to Jane. Alongside Jane, we've got Anna Rasmussen, who's a senior product marketing manager at Third Fort. Third Fort being the digital onboarding provider for law firms across the UK. Anna has been with Third Fort for over 3 years, working closely with the product team from development through to client experience. Third Fort enables law firms to onboard clients securely and compliantly in minutes. Anna sits right at the intersection of what the product does and how the client feels about it. So, welcome, Anna, also. Okay, cool. So, to get started, let's kick off with discussing why the client journey belongs in tech strategy in the first place. It'd be great to start with yourself, Jane. In really simple terms, why does the client journey have to be part of tech strategy conversations, and what goes wrong when it isn't?
I think it's really easy for law firms to get stuck in the operational side of business, to focus on what needs to be better and how do we improve efficiencies. But what we sometimes forget is that actually the customer journey, the customer experience, and how they interact with a law firm is our differentiator. It's something that is really going to be the thing that someone talks about. And we sometimes overlook that. So I think that's why it's really important that the two bits come together on that.
In terms of what goes wrong when it isn't, I mean, if when the client isn't considered, as
Yeah, I
part of
think
the law firm's thinking.
Yeah, I think what can happen is you end up building services for users that don't have those needs. And I think we forget that actually we should listen to what our customers require before we start fixing things, and make sure that the services we're developing are actually for our users. So that's kind of I think where it can go wrong. And it's important to make sure that the the journey is part of the solution, when we consider that.
For yourself, Anna, in the introduction, I talked about you being at the intersection between, product being built and developed, and also capturing what clients require. For yourself, why is it important to be thinking about the client when developing products or creating services within a law firm or a vendor?
Yeah, I think like from our perspective, we're always taking a client first approach when we're building our apps because we know that the point that the client is interacting with us, that's a representation of our clients, so the law firms that we're working with. So I think why it's important to have the thinking about the client when you're building out your tech stack, when in terms of what your clients are actually going to be interacting with, you have to feel assured that the technology that you're working with is going to represent you how you would like to be represented. So I would use like an example of would you hire an onboarding manager or someone who's going to be manually onboarding your clients who speaks to your client in a confusing or inefficient way? You wouldn't do that. So I think can apply that same sort of thought to when you're employing a technology provider to effectively provide that service to your clients, your end users. So yeah, I think it's really important just to have that in mind. Like think of it as employing a staff or a team member. Like you're not going to employ someone that doesn't speak in a way that you would endorse.
And that's what you find when you engage with firms, maybe that the client's voice hasn't been captured, at all, or maybe that technology has been implemented without the client's needs in mind. Is a fragmented experience. What can be the experience of using a law firm that doesn't think in that way?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at, let's use onboarding as an example, that's often the first part in a long journey, a potentially very long journey, whether that's a housing transaction or other sort of legal programs. Like you really need to consider how every point along that client journey feels for the client. If you're using, you can use a multitude of different providers, but if they're not sort of adhering to the same sort of standard, it's going to feel very up and down for that client. They're typically, depending on the type of transaction, of course, but some of them, this is the biggest transaction they ever do in their life. It's a very big thing for them. It's very important. Feeling stressed out by a technology provider at that point, I think is just really detrimental to like how your client feels about you and your firm and the process as a whole. It's already stressful. I think the key thing to think is let's not make it more stressful and actually let's look at it from the opposing way and actually try and make it like a moment where they actually feel good about it. So if you can change it from this potentially negative, stressful experience into something positive, I think that really can reflect positively on your firm. And then the rest of the interactions you're going to have with that client is going to be a lot easier and a lot more smooth from then on if you start off a good footing.
Pathetic is, but it's important to think in that way, and the fact that you're a law firm that processes thousands of matters a year, but for that individual client, this isn't a run of the mill everyday occurrence, and it's something that's really going to impact their current and their future lives. From yourself, Jane, you obviously came in, as I mentioned in the introduction, from out externally outside the legal sector. When you started working with Thorntons, what did you see in terms of at that point on their journey? And I know Thorntons have been fantastic, very forward thinking in terms of putting their client at the heart of every decision that they make. What did you see and find in terms of how the client's journey was seen and thought of, and also, capturing some of the internal stakeholders' feelings and thoughts as well?
Yeah, I would have to say firstly that as an outsider, that's always such a luxurious place to be. It's really lovely to be able to come in and to see something through new, fresh eyes, and it does give perspective to environments that are, possibly running on habits. A lot of, I think, not necessarily just for the legal firms that I've spoken with, but certainly with just people in general. We have habits and we have ways of working that become quite entrenched, and so for somebody to come in as an outsider, that's always such a luxury to be able to see things and to question things. I think that's one of the most joyful parts of my job, is to ask these questions that people don't think to ask because it's just so everyday. And so I think what I did observe was that there were definitely areas where we were seeing the client, and there were areas where we weren't. And it was really important that those were areas that those questions sort of popped up again to say, why have we not asked about this, or how does this affect the client, or and particularly I would say at a strategic level as well, really making sure it's part of that bigger conversation. So it's not just on the ground of how does somebody make a will and what's the customer journey there. It's also a strategic conversation around, we need to make sure that being client-centered is an ethos, not just a sort of project-specific example. So I think that's the way that I've sort of looked at it.
Right, Hannah. Jane's pointing towards assumptions being made. So assumptions being made that maybe a law firm is aware of how a client wants to be served, assumptions that their current process is fit for purpose. Something that you said in our previous prep conversation really stuck with me. It was the fact that completion rates on the third Ford app are actually higher among older users than younger ones. Now that goes against my own assumption and the assumptions of law firms around who wants to interact with technology in a digital way. So, what does that tell us about the assumptions that law firms are still making about their clients?
Yeah, I think you have to be very careful to make demographic assumptions when it comes to like digitization and how people interact with technology. Yeah, to your point, we get higher completion rates. Like it's pretty similar across the board, but the assumption is always that it's going to be much higher in, say, a group like millennials or Gen Z, and that like boomers or other generations are going to be way lower. That is not the case, and I think that it's okay to seek for a law firm to seek reassurance from the vendor or provider that like how are they dealing with those what they perceive as a bulk of it, which to me it actually isn't. It's I think a little bit of bias comes from the fact that you're maybe if a client has a problem with any part of your client journey, they're going to be the loudest, and I think that that creates worry in people. So I would say if you have sort of assumptions you're making about a demographic, to really understand why and maybe challenge that assumption within yourself. And then I would also say if you're working with a vendor and you do have maybe that particular concern about a demographic or something similar, that you address that with them, and you should be able to get that reassurance from them. I would be looking from reassurance in actual stats to ensure that they have created a platform that is actually accessible by people regardless of demographic. So the sort of extension of that would be, is it accessible for people with potential disabilities like vision or hearing, things like that. So I would be, yeah, I would say challenge your own bias, but also it's okay to seek reassurance from the providers that you're working with.
Once again, assumptions, not just how, who wants to use technology and how they want to use it, but also assumptions that maybe those people, those clients that you serve that have challenges, that they can use the existing processes or technology effectively. I think not jump into those assumptions means that you're more likely to implement something that is more effective for everybody that you want to serve.
Yeah.
From yourself, Jane, that I'm guessing that resonates because what we're painting is a scenario that law firms haven't engaged with their clients, having asked the question how they wish to be served or whether what they currently have in place is being effective. That's at the heart of how you believe a law firm should operate. Engaging and finding out if what's in place is working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also good to do a bit of a stress test on that, really working with people to say, okay, how would you really use this? Because it's so easy with those assumptions to design full processes and implement loads of stuff without actually taking it to a user and saying, how would you actually engage with this? And I think it's much easier to do, and it's important that we fail fast with that. It's really important that we test that quickly before embedding huge amounts of effort and time in that process.
That leads me to something that stuck out from our conversation previously, and the fact that law firms need to become more comfortable with failure, of trying new things and failing. So, maybe questioning how they're operating at the moment. You certainly agree with that. That's something that boundaries need to be pushed somewhat sometimes.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think as well, it's about a culture of failure. It's about actually a mindset of failure. And that's really where innovation sits. And I think it's really difficult because there's a lot of pressure on law firms to become much more innovative. It's really easy to say that as a word and to say we should become more innovative. But the reality of that is actually a willingness to try something that is maybe a little bit out of the comfort zone. It's the ability to say, oh, that didn't actually work particularly well. And here's what we've learned from that. And there has to be a couple of things in place for that to work. Hey, and we have time and space for that to happen. And I think that's what feels difficult in a fast-paced environment like legal. So I would say it's incredibly valuable, and it's something that we're going to have to get a little bit better at, particularly as we start to see an increase in AI and the development of technology arriving at a much quicker loop. So we need to get much better at failing and learning in a quicker succession.
Really interested in how you guys have used your service design background to implement change, identify and challenge these assumptions. Could you talk through a little bit about how you've approached things at Thornton's, from a service design methodology, how you've, captured needs, requirements, maybe dispelled those assumptions and promoted that culture of innovation?
Yeah, sure. So I think we kind of took a three-pronged approach to that. So one of the areas that we looked at was training, and we wanted to do something that, because it seems obvious if you're going to look at AI that, you upskill people, but it wasn't, we wanted to kind of go beyond the basic watch something, learn it, and get on with it approach. We wanted people to understand, I think, the meaning that's associated with it, because I think meaning is the thing that actually brings people along with you and makes people want to be interested in something. So our training actually looked at, first of all, building context. So we were really interested in sort of placing AI within a bigger picture and talking about how that affects either they had to, the group that were in our training were either looking at how does it affect a colleague or how does it affect a client? And what is the purpose of AI? What will it shift in the market? What will it mean for the future of how things look? And therefore, what does it mean as a practitioner? And what do we have to change? And that context building piece was really important to then looking at why training was important, and why they then wanted to train in certain ways so that certain work types could be enhanced by AI. So that was the kind of training aspect. And then we looked at how we could work in departments, so bringing full departments together so that we weren't just sort of problem solving for one person, or we weren't problem solving for a strategic direction necessarily. This was about on the ground voices, and we wanted to hear what we call the grunt work, which is the stuff that you sit at your desk in the morning and think, oh no, I've got 10 of those to do and they're going to take me ages. And we wanted to really identify what some of those areas were. So I designed AI sprint kind of plan that was a little bit of upskilling, so bringing everybody up to speed. And that included sometimes as simply as just sitting with someone and getting them to type something into Copilot and see that it wasn't going to end the world in that moment, and it wasn't as scary perhaps as they'd thought, all the way through to kind of designing workflows where AI could maybe improve efficiencies and change the way that they work on a daily basis, but it was informed by them, the people that were using the technology and that were on the coal face of facing the problem. So that was a really lovely model that helped us to, again, build out solutions with meaning. And we've got some great agents now that are working in our estate agency department. And then the final thing that we looked at were the more crunchy problems, the kind of more project-based work, which was where there was maybe strategic alignment, but they were kind of messier problems. They were connected to lots of other things and required a bit of digging. So that's where service design really came in, to pull apart some of the solutions and think about it beyond just the technology as well, and thinking about actually it's possibly a governance challenge, it's possibly a documentation standardization issue, it's maybe, it's not the technology itself, although that was part of that journey. So we did sort of project focused work as well. And we've got some great things that I've just launched in our TPS department where we're looking at report on titles. So yeah, those are the three sort of prongs of the development of AI engagement that we've worked on with service design.
And whether you're deploying an AI, the AI projects that you discussed there, or the digital will project that you've overseen before, how do you capture the process that's occurring now to be able to then look to improve it through technology, and of course capture the client's voice and make sure that it fits with the client's needs? Is it through group facilitation? How do you capture the client's input as part of that project?
Yeah, I think it's different for every project. Certainly, I think collaboratively is the way forward. I think working with others is a really important way of making sure that you're getting a good picture of the ecosystem that you are designing for, because just one voice on its own or one person's agenda on its own will only make that product right for that person, whereas you need to make sure that it's going to work for as many people as possible, and I'm sure that speaks a lot to the work that Anna does. But in terms of the client side of it, I think we've tended to look at internal clients. So for certain projects, we'll work with people who have maybe used our services but are also employees, and that's a really safe space to sort of play around with some of these ideas. And certainly if somebody doesn't have a service design department or someone who's aligned to that kind of work, is a really nice way for firms to start thinking about that. So it's looking at yeah, so one of the things we did look at was the selling of a property, and we would ask colleagues that had sold properties with us to actually come and give honest feedback and to work with us through the process that we were involved in. And then with our wills project as well, it's important to have sort of focus groups and to hear from previous clients as well. So I do find, and I know people are not always keen to look at it, but honest feedback from clients is one of the best ways to find out what you're really working with. And so we tend to use some of those reviews to build some of our solutions as well.
And talking to kind of pivot towards the kind of vendor's view in terms of how you guys go about developing a product that works for the client, and then also, how do you turn and ensure that it integrates with the existing stack for the law firm? You mentioned previously in our conversation that Third Fort really started with the client. So it was the client application that was built first, captured the needs of the client, and then looked inwards to the law firm. Could you talk through that a little bit in terms of why you take that approach and the benefit that it gave you?
Yeah, I mean, the Third Fort origin story is that our two founders had a friend who was basically defrauded throughout the house buying process. So at a highly emotional point in the journey, lost, I think it was 25,000 pounds, like their large portion of their deposit. So I think that the fact that the foundations of the company is based on a client experience, it helps us a lot, because we draw a lot on making sure that during an emotional time in an onboarding journey, is that we are making sure that they feel reassured and are comfortable with what they're doing and understand what's happening. But I think how we apply it day to day is like Jane said, is just continuous feedback. So we get feedback from the clients directly, so from the end user of the app directly. We also get feedback from that same group, but via the law firm. So they'll, of course, if they have a client who's upset or even has a positive experience, we also have a good feedback loop with our clients there. And then, of course, we have a feedback loop with our law firm clients about how the experience is going for them. So we do balance both together. Neither of them work in a silo. But when it comes to the client experience specifically, we have a huge feedback machine, and that is because we request a lot of feedback. So I think that draws on Jane's point about really asking for that feedback, that genuine, honest feedback. We also get our law firm clients, so people that work at the firms we're working with, to go through the journey as well. So we do have a massive feedback loop there, and of course we have we record everything to do with our support. So that is a huge source of information about how our clients are experiencing the app as well. But I'd say from a law firm's perspective, if you want to look at the whole thing holistically, I would be trying to identify those points throughout the journey that you know are particularly stressful or you're getting a lot of feedback on, and then look into them and think about how can we improve that portion. So just do it bits at a time instead of looking at the whole thing and then trying to do it all as one big project, like all in one go. I think it's better to segment it off.
So to staying on that, what makes for a good law firm client in terms of rolling out third for as a piece of technology? What you talked about you know advice for the law firm in breaking up the project into small pillars that they can work on. So yeah, could you expand on that? What from the implementations that have gone really well,
Yep.
what's the commonality between those law firms in terms of the preparation that they've done?
I think the willingness part and the psychological safety part that Jane was speaking about, I think that's really important. So I think the mindset of like we feel comfortable with using a digital onboarding and AML verification product. I think that's important. I think also having champions within the business, obviously clearly defined. This is for any project though, like clearly define who's actually managing the project and the rollout. You really want one specific champion. And then we've also found when we have clients who have done the journey themselves, obviously a lot of people have actually just gone through a third fort journey in their personal life, but we also like to make sure that if they want, they can go through it again so they can really understand what their client is going to experience. I think that helps a lot. And then I would also say another like sort of positive signifier of where the rollout's going to be smooth is if they've thought about how third fort works in with the rest of their client experience as well. So not just looking at it in a silo. You can work on each part as a small project. I recommend that, but you still have to have the overall view of the full journey. But yeah, that's what typically is an indicator of a good productive rollout, I would say.
Moved up there. You both through the things that you both said. I think what I picked up is the fact that everybody needs to know why you're doing this as well. So there needs to be buy-in, extra, from a client point of view as well from an internal point of view. And an important thing I think you said there, Anna, was it's not just about the technology. So how else are you communicating with your clients? The language that you're using, what information is available. I know that previous projects that Thorntons have deployed, Jane, have focused around that digital will service and looking to offer your clients the ability to do at least some of the process in digitally rather than being completely human led. And I remember having a conversation with one of your team talking about how it was so important that the marketing guys were on board with this. The website used the appropriate language to explain what the process looked like. I wonder whether, from a service designer point of view, I wonder whether you could expand on that as to why it's important not just to think about the technology, to be human centric, but also think about the other ways that you're communicating and what the client experience is like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think transformation, when we talk about it, we think it maybe belongs to one team, but actually it's a really collective effort. I think it has to be the technology can maybe be developed by a dedicated sort of workforce and people who really know the ins and outs of that. But when it comes to people really adopting it. You need to communicate it. It needs to feel like it's something of value. It needs to be used properly as well. So there's an internal versus external aspect to that, where we need colleagues to be able to use it well and to feel confident using it. So things like training, for example, are really important with new systems and new processes. And then, as you've kind of rightly said, the way that it's marketed and the way that it sits alongside the brand is very important, because things like, and we're going to start to see that increasingly, is, services are going to be very technology is going to be heavily involved going forwards with a lot of processes in the legal space, and how we communicate the reason for it is incredibly important, and the value to the client and why we've chosen to make certain decisions around technology will feed not only from inside the business, but it will kind of feed out into the marketing surrounded, and the brand alignment to what you're projecting into the world. So it's critical to be able to work with all of these different departments.
Once again, focusing on the subject of assumptions, my understanding is that as you rolled out that digital wills program, actually, you in certain areas of the process, you took a step back from the digital elements of it and gave your clients a bit of an off ramp to be able to interact with a human. So once again, you didn't live with the assumptions that, hey, everybody wants super quick, a digital service. Some people want that human in the loop, where appropriate. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that we should always ask. There's always the potential for technology to perhaps speed something up, but the question should be why? What is it, something that someone's asked for? Is it that there is a need for it? And is there an alternative for somebody who maybe doesn't want to look at that? So one of the things in the wills process that we're looking at the moment is, perhaps if we are doing using a digital interface whilst we're in an interview, and we're speaking with a client and we're just working on the digital interface, will there be occasions where either that isn't appropriate, or it's seen as a barrier, or people aren't comfortable with that, in which case we have to have other alternative methods of capturing that information, because it may not be the right thing for the client. And I think that's where the client voice, and really understanding the stage in life and perhaps the life event that's associated with the service as well, is really important.
Um, you talked earlier, Jane, about AI projects that you facilitated within Thornton's. Just turning to the subject of AI with yourself, Anna. I know that Third Fort is moving towards utilizing AI where it adds benefit through being more conversational.
Yeah.
Could you talk through where that's heading, and how do you make sure it enhances the client experience rather than adding complexity?
Yeah, for sure. So with an app journey, I mean, they're already dynamic. So there's already the element of like, if a client is answering a question in a certain way, we're then going to ask a specific follow-up question. It's just that is now definitely going to be able to be augmented with the power of AI. So we're really going to be able to create app journeys that feel more like a conversation with clients. So in the example of, there's a lot of complexity when people are doing their ID or source of funds verification for a house transaction, and to be able to actually augment that with AI to make the conversation that they're having with the app feel more like what's happening with the conveyancer, we can then take some of that work off the conveyancer as well. So I think that there's the benefit of that for the client, because they're only being asked for what they specifically need to provide. And we've also taken that legwork and that ongoing conversation off from the conveyancer and client relationship. And I think that you can have the same conversation about ID of any type of onboarding, where it's like, oh, hey, you've sent me an expired passport, and you're going back and forth with that client. And that is actually a worse experience. And I think like the majority of people in my experience would prefer a digitized experience that's actually functional, as opposed to a conversation with a person. But I think it's important, just like what Jane was mentioning, this can be a very stressful moment. I'm obviously always talking about this very stressful moment in people's lives. Like, this is a big moment of trust for them. So that sort of human in the loop thing that you mentioned, I think it's really important. And that's what I think law firms should be pushing their vendors to explain. What do you do in those edge cases where it isn't possible or where it does go wrong? So it's okay to rely on the technology. I think that the technology is getting better every day, but I think it's also important that we push back on the vendors to ask, like, well, what's happening in those edge cases? And like Jane mentioned, with the video call example, like, if it's not able to be done, then what happens then? And I think your vendors should be very capable they should be able to explain to you what happens in those situations. Yeah, and I think that goes back to the wider service design and the wider client journey design, is you also have to understand how that flow works if they have to go outside of a technology provider as well.
Yeah, Jane, obviously you've been focused on internal AI projects. When it, just framing the same question again, really, when the temptation is going to be to push more and more of this technology towards the client. But I presume you agree it's a case of, choosing when to use that technology and how to frame it for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question is it the appropriate solution? What is the benefit of it? And do we have a good grasp of what the benefit is as well? I would really ask questions around, what is it that we're tracking? What are we trying to achieve? What are the goals of doing that? And then how do we enhance that? So not only does it, you're providing something to a client where it does solve a problem and it's very digital interface, but also how do we enhance that beyond just that experience? Because I think a lot of people do still really value connection and interpersonal opportunities, and so that's my big passion is really, okay, with this technology, what does it leverage time to do? And then how do we double down on what amazing service looks like, for example, or how do we use the ability to kind of support technology to still go above and beyond? And so I think that's really the question. In addition to that is, what does it allow us to do that's even better with that technology? But yes, we're certainly starting to see more and more of those interfaces being direct to clients. So we're certainly asking questions about, okay, in advance of that, how do we enhance the brand? How do we make sure that people associate that interface with Thornton's, rather than just as a process? You want them to be able to see the personal side of what you're delivering.
It's really important to think, you mentioned brand. All of this should start with, who the firm is, what clients do they want to serve? How do those clients want to be served? So what is your proposition? And then it's a case of, okay, well, what should that process look like, and what role does technology play? Historically, law firm brands are quite similar to each other. There's not that much differentiation at high street law firm level. So we don't really want to make that even more exaggerated through everybody, using the same technology and delivering services in the same way. For most law firms, their people is their differentiator. So you've got to bring that human element in terms of how clients are served. And the answer from a technology point of view is not the same to somebody that is a more focused, bespoke, potentially law firm provider, and those that are looking to provide at volume, with that service being focused on lower cost. So the answer isn't the same for everybody. So in terms of bringing this session to a close, and advising law firm leaders, IT directors, whatever role they have within the legal firm, on how to get started with bringing the client's voice into the process. Jane, could I go to yourself first in terms of a takeaway? Throughout this series, we are advising law firm leaders on how they can modernize their tech stack, how they can take stock of things, how they can start with mapping their processes, capturing the voices from internally within their teams. From yourself, what would be the starting point for that law firm leader that's on a journey to modernize their tech stack and hopefully improve their operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a bit of a theme of the day, but really just not making assumptions. I would really make sure that you're listening to what the real grunt work is for your colleagues, and to also just to sit and observe, really watch the day-to-day life of people that are in your firm, and see where there are challenges, where there are barriers, where there are where time's lost. And also when you're mapping out those processes, being really mindful of the client voice within that, and wherever you can. So whether that's internal current clients, or that you've got scope to maybe do focus groups or to hear other voices, wherever you can, to bring them into the picture, because it will only enhance what you're developing.
From yourself, Anna, for the same question, the law firm leader may be questioning whether their client onboarding process and technology is up to scratch. Where would you advise they start?
Yeah, I think once you've sort of had a look, I would first want to do a project like Jane's and actually identify where the main pain points are for the client. So I think once you've established that and you're actually moving to selecting a technology provider, I would really encourage people to experience that technology provider as if they were the client, whether that's like going through a check or actually watching a check be done live, or any your provider should be able to provide you with that at a minimum, and if not, then at least a video of how that journey looks, so you really understand, and the people speaking with your clients really understand how that journey works, because that's going to pay off so much down the line. I would also look for other social proof. So can you go on and find online reviews, and like non-paid reviews from actual users about how they experience that product, and also, like Jane mentioned earlier, if you know people at the firm that have potentially gone through that process, like lean on them and get their insights as well. Yeah, I think it's just very important to understand how that product is, not only from your side, like the fee earners or whoever's using the product, but also from the client, like really experience it as if you were them. And I think that gives you a better like understanding of whether that's going to be a provider that suits your firm.
Yeah, brilliant. And I really took away from, once again, the key word of the day is assumption, and not to make them. But I really took away your advice, Anna, as to how law firms can be better clients for their technology partners as well by
Yeah.
doing some of the stuff that Jane's talking about, having that visibility of how they're currently operating, who they want to be, how they want to serve their clients. And it's a lot easier for a tech vendor to come into that situation and provide a great service and enhance that law firm service, rather than engage with a law firm that maybe doesn't have those question answers answered and is unsure as to what they want to deliver. So brilliant. Okay, thanks so much for that session. Brilliant. Fantastic opinions. Please reach out to Anna or Jane via LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, which I always forget to flag at the beginning of webinars, please reach out to any of us, and we can direct them to the appropriate person. This is obviously, I believe, the fourth episode of the 7-part webinar series. So please look at the other sessions that are up and coming. The next one is, of course, on AI. I think this is we managed to suppress AI chat to being only around 30% of this session. So I think we've done really well. But yeah, we have to obviously discuss it in more depth at some point. So the next session, we're actually looking at the place within the AI strategies for law firms of the big boys in terms of using Microsoft Copilot, or of course now Claude, but also what place do more specific legal AI tools play within a law firm strategy. So we've got some great guests to discuss that. And always, just to plug the white paper that kicked off this series, it's available on our website within the Insights page, and it focuses on all of those key categories that make up what we have deemed the legal modern workplace. So amongst those, the collaboration, productivity, the security element, and more. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again Jane. Thanks again to Anna, and we'll see you on one of the next sessions. Cheers. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.